In the deep silence of the Egyptian dawn, before the wind begins to move across the plateau, the stones of Giza still hold a low, unbroken hum. It's the sound of measure, of alignment, of something left behind by people who built not for a generation but for the memory of time itself. For centuries, we've studied their geometry, traced their precision, and searched for the secret written between their shadows. Yet the closer we look, the further the answer drifts, buried beneath the same light that has touched these stones for 4,000 years. Tonight, we return to the plateau, to the line where myth and mathematics meet, a place where sound becomes structure and memory becomes design. Because some say the pyramids were tombs, others believe they were messages. But all agree on one truth: their builders knew something we have only begun to rediscover. Khufu's borrowed pyramid. In the deserts west of Cairo, the Great Pyramid rises in quiet defiance of time. Measured, mapped, and scanned for more than 2 centuries, it remains the most studied structure in human history. Yet beneath the calm certainty of textbooks lies a quieter dispute, one that questions whether Pharaoh Khufu truly built the monument that bears his name, or if he merely inherited a wonder from a forgotten age. Early records from ancient Egypt tell a curious story. In the writings of Herodotus, compiled around 440 BCE, Khufu is said to have ruled Egypt for 50 years and to have commissioned the Great Pyramid during that time. But no contemporary Egyptian text from Khufu's own reign states that he built it. The official inscription, known as the Inventory Stela, found near the Sphinx Temple and dated to the 26th dynasty, over 1,000 years after Khufu's time, mentions something striking. It claims that the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx already stood when Khufu arrived to restore them, describing him as a caretaker rather than a creator. The Giza plateau itself gives little away. The limestone bedrock shows traces of quarry marks that seem older than the 4th dynasty. Weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure, particularly the deep vertical channels studied by geologist Robert Schoch in the early 1992, suggest erosion by rainfall rather than desert wind. If that interpretation is correct, the structures may predate Egypt's dry climate by several thousand years. The last time that much rainfall fell on Giza was between 7,000 and 9,000 BCE, long before the age of the pharaohs. Inside the Great Pyramid, the evidence grows more complex. When British explorer Howard Vyse entered the upper relieving chambers in 1837, he discovered red ochre markings on the walls, hieroglyphs naming Khufu, also written as Khnum Khuf. These symbols became the key proof that Khufu built the pyramid. Yet later studies raised doubts. The marks appear uneven, some written upside down or on blocks that were likely moved into place before the paint had dried. Zechariah Sitchin and other researchers argued that Vyse's crew may have copied or even forged the symbols to secure credit for the discovery. The claim remains controversial, but it opened a crack in the once solid consensus. Archaeologists such as Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass counter that extensive workers' villages found southeast of the pyramid confirm Khufu's project. Excavations uncovered bakeries, workshops, and sleeping quarters for labor gangs, labeled with names like the Drunkards of Menkaure and the Friends of Khufu. But none of the surviving graffiti directly states that the Great Pyramid was being built. At that time, it only stewed. Connects Khufu's name to the workers themselves. Even the engineering invites uncertainty. The sheer precision of the Great Pyramid surpasses that of later constructions. Each side aligns almost perfectly with the cardinal points, deviating by only a fraction of a degree. The base covers 13 acres, yet the difference in length between the longest and shortest sides is less than 2 inches. Later pyramids, built within a century of Khufu, show clear declines in accuracy and quality. The Pyramid of Menkaure, smaller and roughly finished, seems a step backward in skill rather than progress. Some Egyptologists argue that this can be explained by resource exhaustion or changing priorities. Others find it improbable that the earliest example of a technique would also be the most perfect. In many sciences, mastery follows experimentation. Here, it seems reversed. The Great Pyramid stands as if born fully mature, without visible predecessors. A handful of anomalies deepen the mystery. French surveyor Charles Piazzi-Smith, in the 19th century, measured the pyramid's dimensions and noted that its height, multiplied by 43,200, equals the polar radius of the Earth in inches. Modern measurements confirm the accuracy within a small margin. The same scale factor applies to the base perimeter and the planet's equatorial circumference. Some interpret this as coincidence. Others see it as a sign of advanced geodetic knowledge that should not have existed in 2500 BCE. Within the king's chamber, the granite box known as the sarcophagus shows no carvings, cartouches, or royal insignia. Its interior volume matches, within 0.002%, the cubic half of a cubic yard, a unit unknown to ancient Egypt, but aligning precisely with modern imperial measure. This curious proportionality has long puzzled surveyors and mathematicians alike. The core stones of the pyramid, weathered and uneven, contrast with the once polished Tura limestone casing that reflected sunlight like mirrors. Few casing blocks remain, removed across centuries for use in Cairo's buildings. But the precision joints between surviving stones are so fine that a single sheet of paper cannot pass through them. The implication is of techniques either lost or never fully understood. In 1987, a Japanese team from Waseda University used microgravimetric scans to search for hidden chambers. Their data hinted at voids and anomalies beyond the known corridors, including one near the base that has never been opened. Later, in 2017, the Scan Pyramids project confirmed a massive hidden cavity above the Grand Gallery, roughly 30 meters long. Its purpose remains unknown. Some believe it was a structural relief space. Others call it a remnant of an earlier phase, perhaps an interior preserved from an older monument, later expanded or reused by Khufu's engineers. The debate returns, always, to silence. The pyramid's interior bears no murals, no inscriptions, no royal boasts. In a civilization that filled tombs with painted prayers and names meant to secure immortality, this absence feels deliberate. Egyptologist Salim Hassan once described it as a monument without a voice. Whether Khufu built the Great Pyramid or only restored it, the stones themselves preserve no loyalty. Their age may be greater than any king's reign, and their alignment may speak to a knowledge measured not in dynasties, but in millennia. For now, the monument endures, silent in the desert light, belonging to no one and everyone at once. The Sphinx that remembered the rain. At the edge of the Giza plateau, half buried in desert sand, lies a figure whose face has watched both sunrise and erosion. The Great Sphinx, 240 feet long and carved from a single ridge of limestone, has stood in silence for thousands of years. Officially, it is said to have been sculpted during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BCE. Yet there are clues weathered, measured, and whispered through stone that suggest the Sphinx may have witnessed a much older world, one where the air carried rain instead of dust. When Napoleon's engineers arrived in Egypt in 1798, they found the Sphinx buried up to its neck. The first modern excavation, led by Giovanni Battista Caviglia in 1817, revealed the body and paws beneath tons of compacted sand. But as the sand was removed, archaeologists noticed deep channels carved vertically into the walls of the Sphinx enclosure. These grooves, running down the limestone bedrock, did not resemble the horizontal abrasion caused by wind-blown sand. Instead, they looked like marks left by water by centuries of heavy rainfall. In the early 1992, Boston University geologist Robert M. Schoch examined the pattern more closely. Comparing the erosion on the Sphinx's body to that on nearby 4th Dynasty temples, he concluded that the statue's wear could not have been caused by mere wind and sand. The rock showed signs of precipitation, weathering, erosion from sustained heavy rain. Egypt's climate, however, had not seen such rainfall since the end of the Pleistocene, between 7000 and 9000 BCE. If Schoch's analysis was correct, the Sphinx must have been carved in a time when the Sahara was still green. Egyptologists were quick to challenge the claim. Zahi Hawass argued that the channels could have formed through subsurface salt crystallization and capillary action, a process that weakens limestone as groundwater evaporates. Others suggested that restoration works during the Old Kingdom, when the Sphinx was already ancient, might have altered its appearance. Still, the debate changed how people saw the monument. It was no longer just a royal sculpture, it became a geological puzzle. The head of the Sphinx complicates the matter further. It appears disproportionately small compared to the vast body, leading some to believe it was recarved from an earlier lion's head. The style of the face, though often attributed to Khafre, lacks definitive evidence. The erosion on the head is also much lighter than that on the body, supporting the idea that it was reshaped long after the original carving had suffered damage. In 1858, Auguste Mariette uncovered the so-called dream stele between the Sphinx's paws. The granite slab, erected by Pharaoh Thutmose IV around 1400 BCE, records a dream in which the godlike Sphinx promised him kingship if he would clear away the sand. This inscription proves that the Sphinx was already ancient and partially buried 1,000 years before Herodotus wrote about Egypt. The text calls it Horus of the Horizon, as if it were not built by the pharaoh but discovered by him. Later restorations by Ramses II in the 13th century BCE also treated the Sphinx as a relic, not a construction project. Archaeological notes from the site show multiple layers of repair, each made with distinct masonry styles stretching across dynasties. The builders of each era seem to view the monument as sacred inheritance. If the Sphinx truly predates dynastic Egypt, it raises questions about who carved it. Ancient Egyptian myths speak of a Zep Tepi, the first time, an age when gods ruled on earth before human dynasties began. The concept appears in the pyramid texts of the 5th and 6th dynasties, describing a golden era when the Nile flowed differently and the stars stood in other positions. Some modern researchers link this mythic first time to the Sphinx's origins, proposing that it was carved to face the rising sun in the constellation of Leo around 10,500 BCE. At that date, the lion-shaped Sphinx would have aligned perfectly with its celestial counterpart on the horizon. Archaeoastronomer Robert Bauval noted that the layout of the 3 Giza pyramids mirrors the belt stars of Orion. If both the pyramids and the Sphinx align with ancient sky patterns, they could form a single unified plan, a star map preserved in stone. Mainstream scholars dismiss this as coincidence, pointing out that the pyramids were built at least 8,000 years after the supposed Leo alignment. But the correlation continues to intrigue researchers who study pre-dynastic structures. Excavations around the Sphinx reveal evidence of older construction beneath the visible surface. Beneath the pores lies a network of tunnels and chambers, some mapped by radar but not yet opened. In the 1920 Emil Bariz's restoration uncovered a doorway at the rear of the monument leading into solid limestone. Later, in 1991, seismologist Thomas Debecki detected cavities under the forepaws large enough to hold rooms or vaults. These findings were confirmed by the Egyptian Antiquities Organization, but remain sealed under sand and debate. Even the material of the Sphinx hints at an uneven story. The body was cut directly from layers of nummulitic limestone, each with a different resistance to weathering. The lower layers are heavily eroded, while the upper ones remain sharper, implying the sculpture was exposed to moisture from the ground upward. The head, carved from harder stone, resists decay, another reason it may have survived earlier than the body itself. If the Sphinx stood through rains and floods long before Khafre, it might have served as a landmark for later builders of Giza. The Old Kingdom pharaohs, encountering an immense lion-shaped monument, could have claimed it within their cultural memory, renaming, restoring, and surrounding it with their own architecture. The Sphinx, in that sense, may be both prehistoric and dynastic, its meaning rewritten by each generation that uncovered its face. In a letter written in 1853, British engineer Henry Salt describes standing before the Sphinx at sunset, the sand rising again around its chest. "It seemed," he wrote, "not the guardian of a tomb, but of an age we have forgotten. Today, that feeling persists." The monument speaks in silence, its contours shaped by water, wind, and human belief. Whether carved in the time of Khafre or in a world still touched by rain, the Sphinx remains the witness of both histories, the known and the guessed. It remembers climates and kings, standing alone on the plateau as if waiting for memory itself to erode. The hidden chambers of Giza. Beneath the hot stillness of the Giza plateau lies a network of stone, air, and silence that remains only partly known. For more than a century, explorers have searched beneath the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, and the sands between them, suspecting that the visible monuments are only the surface of something deeper. Ancient writers, local legends, and modern scans all point to the same quiet idea that Giza was built not only upward, but inward and below. The earliest stories come from the history of Egypt, written by the 1st century historian Strabo. He described a stone in the pyramid which, being raised, shows a sloping passage leading to the foundations. In the same century, Pliny the Elder mentioned hidden chambers filled with idols of serpents. These accounts were dismissed for centuries as imagination. Yet in 1817, British explorer Giovanni Caviglia cleared the sand surrounding the Sphinx and recorded narrow shafts and sealed blocks leading downward. His notes, later examined by Howard Weiss and Henry Salt, mention passages that seemed to vanish into solid bedrock. The idea of hidden tunnels gained new life in the late 20th century. In 1978, a group from Stanford Research Institute conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey around the Great Pyramid. Their instruments detected several anomalies, regions of lower density beneath the monument and near the causeway linking it to the Sphinx. The results were never fully published, but fragments of their report mentioned voids consistent with man-made cavities. Nearly a decade later, in 1987, Japan's Waseda University led another subsurface investigation using microgravimetry. Professor Sakuji Yoshimura's team found distinct density gaps beneath the Sphinx, particularly under the left paw and directly behind the statue. The anomalies were symmetrical, suggesting constructed chambers rather than natural fissures. Egyptian officials granted no further excavation. The data were archived and quietly referenced in later surveys. In 1991, seismologists Thomas Debecki and John Anthony West performed additional measurements. Using low-frequency vibrations to map density, they confirmed rectangular cavities beneath the forepaws and along the body's flanks, ranging from 20 to 30 feet deep. The pattern, Dubetsky wrote, implies deliberate excavation. The discovery sparked speculation about what might rest inside archives, burial rooms, or older foundations from an unknown era. The Great Pyramid itself conceals its own mysteries. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project, led by the Faculty of Engineering at Cairo University and the HIP Institute in Paris, employed cosmic ray muon tomography, a method that tracks the passage of high-energy particles from space through stone. The detectors revealed a large, previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery, roughly 30 meters long and 8 meters high. Its orientation mirrors the gallery below, yet it shows no visible access route. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities acknowledged the discovery but called it a structural cavity. Other researchers disagreed. Glenn Dash, an engineer involved in the project, remarked that no ancient builder creates space on this scale by accident. The void, now called the Big Void, remains sealed and untouched. Additional thermal imaging conducted by the same team identified several hot and cold spots near the pyramid's northern base. These temperature fluctuations suggest air movement behind the stones, possibly narrow corridors or sealed entrances. One of these anomalies aligns with the descending passage first described by Strabo nearly 2,000 years ago. Even the smaller pyramids show hints of hidden complexity. In 1954, while clearing the southeastern corner of Khufu's pyramid, archaeologist Kamal El-Malak uncovered a deep pit sealed with limestone slabs. Inside was a full-sized cedarwood boat, perfectly preserved. Hieroglyphs on the casing stone named Khufu, but no record mentioned the boat's existence before its discovery. When a second pit was located nearby decades later, it too contained a dismantled vessel, still sealed. The pits had escaped notice for over 4,000 years, suggesting that more unseen chambers could remain beyond reach. Local tradition around Giza long held that the plateau's monuments were connected by passages running beneath the desert. In 1935, a forgotten report by Dr. Selim Hassan recorded a series of rooms and tunnels near the Sphinx, some descending toward the Nile. His maps, filed with the Cairo archives, were later re-examined and found to correspond roughly with the anomalies detected by modern equipment. The purpose of these hidden spaces is uncertain. Some Egyptologists believe they were part of quarrying operations used during construction. Others propose they served as symbolic underworld routes for the king's soul. A few researchers, following older legends of the Hall of Records, imagine that beneath the Sphinx lies an archive of pre-dynastic knowledge texts or artifacts preserved from a civilization predating Egypt itself. In 1993, German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robotic camera, Upuaut 2, into one of the pyramid's narrow shafts branching from the Queen's chamber. After crawling upward for more than 200 feet, the robot encountered a small limestone door fitted with copper handles. The discovery was unexpected. It looked like a sealed gate, untouched since antiquity. When the chamber was re-examined a decade later using a newer robot, Pyramid Rover, another space was found beyond the door, a second block closing a small cavity between them. What lies beyond remains unknown. The repeated pattern of doors, voids, and cavities has made Giza a monument of layers. Every discovery leads not to answers, but to quieter mysteries. Each passage suggests the presence of another, deeper still. In 2015, Dr. Mehdi Tayobi of the HIP Institute summarized the findings in a short statement. The Great Pyramid behaves like an iceberg, What we see above ground may be only a fraction of what exists. Today, much of what lies beneath remains sealed under both stone and policy. Official excavations proceed slowly, constrained by preservation laws and the delicate balance between science and heritage. Yet satellite and muon scans continue to map invisible corridors, tracing the breadth of empty space within stone. If these hidden chambers were deliberate, built, sealed, and forgotten, they may hold not treasures but information, construction methods, texts, or evidence of an older design reused by later kings. Each survey brings the plateau closer to confession, yet the monuments still choose silence. The sand moves, the instruments hum, and beneath them, the oldest rooms in human architecture wait untouched, unmoved, unseen, the blueprint beneath the sand. Across the Giza plateau, the monuments stand in deliberate silence, arranged with a precision that continues to puzzle engineers and historians alike. The Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafre, and the smaller Pyramid of Menkaure form a pattern that has been measured, debated, and redrawn countless times. But viewed from above, their layout begins to reveal something beyond individual ambition, a plan so consistent and geometrically exact that it suggests a design older than any king's lifetime. Beneath the sand, beneath the visible history, lies what many call the hidden blueprint of Giza. In 1994, engineer and researcher Robert Bauval published The Orion Mystery. His work drew attention to the positional relationship between the three pyramids and the stars of Orion's belt: Al-Natak, Al-Nalam, and Mintaka. The alignment was not perfect, but strikingly close. When charted using astronomical software, Bauval found that the pyramids matched the celestial pattern precisely as it would have appeared around 10,500 BCE. That date, long before recorded Egyptian civilization, seemed impossible. Yet the sky does not lie. Due to the slow wobble of Earth's axis known as precession, star positions shift over millennia. At that ancient date, Orion's belt would have hovered low on the horizon, mirroring the arrangement of Giza's pyramids almost exactly. This concept of as above, so below resonates through Egyptian cosmology. The god Osiris was associated with Orion, and the pharaoh, in death, was said to join him among the stars. The Nile itself, winding northward, corresponds roughly to the Milky Way, another mirror, flowing across heaven and earth. If the pyramids reflect Orion, and the Nile reflects the galaxy, then the entire plateau may be a stone map of the sky. Mainstream Egyptologists remain cautious. They note that Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure reigned within a century of each other, and that each pyramid's alignment could have symbolic rather than astronomical reasons. Yet the geometric precision suggests intentionality beyond symbolism. The baselines of the Great Pyramid align almost perfectly to true north, deviating by only 3/60ths of a degree. Such accuracy would be difficult even with modern surveying tools. No written record describes how it was achieved. Recent satellite analyses have uncovered further consistencies. Using infrared imaging, researchers from the University of Toronto identified straight subsurface anomalies, long buried lines connecting major pyramid foundations, causeways, and temple sites. The lines appear to extend well beyond the current excavation boundaries, implying that the visible monuments may only represent the central nodes of a much larger design. When plotted, the geometry follows ratios of 3, 4, and 5, the same proportions used in Pythagorean triangles thousands of years later. Beneath the sands, traces of these lines coincide with raised platforms, retaining walls, and filled trenches. Some of them align with celestial azimuths, marking solstices and equinoxes. At sunset on the summer solstice, for example, the sun sets precisely between the Great Pyramid and the Pyramid of Khufu, forming a luminous triangle across the plateau. Ancient observers could have tracked these points long before dynastic Egypt formalized its calendar. Architectural historian Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed that the pyramid builders might have used internal ramps spiraling upward within the Great Pyramid. But his simulations also uncovered a consistent proportional rhythm between the pyramid's height and base 1 to 2 pi, suggesting that its geometry encoded not only sacred dimensions, but a mathematical constant. The same ratio appears in the layout distances between the pyramids, forming an invisible circle that touches each apex. Whether coincidence or code, the precision remains unsettlingly exact. In 2001, a French team conducting a topographic survey detected rectangular anomalies beneath the desert surface south of the Great Pyramid. These patterns, regular, aligned, and evenly spaced, were too geometric to be natural. Some researchers interpreted them as remnants of long-eroded foundations, possibly earlier stages of the plateau's development. The results echoed a remark made decades earlier by archaeologist Selim Hassan, who wrote that the ground itself bears the marks of an older plan. The mathematics behind that plan grows stranger still. The distance between the Great Pyramid and the Pyramid of Khufu is 1,760 cubits. Multiply that number by the pyramid's base unit, and the product encodes the exact length of 1 minute of latitude on Earth's surface. These ratios seem to express knowledge of the planet's curvature, knowledge officially unknown to the builders of 2500 BCE. Not all patterns are mathematical. When archaeologists reconstructed the causeways linking the pyramids to their valley temples, they found they all pointed roughly toward Heliopolis, the city of the sun god Ra. This alignment suggests that even the spaces between structures had meaning, uniting solar, stellar, and terrestrial elements into a single system. The pyramids, rather than isolated tombs, appear as stations in a grander design. A fragment of an inscription found near the Sphinx enclosure during the 1920 seconds may hint at this earlier planning. It refers to the horizon of Khufu, written in a style older than Khufu's reign. Some scholars interpret this as evidence that the plateau itself was already sanctified and surveyed before the 4th dynasty, its axes and measurements inherited by later kings who built upon it. In 2005, satellite radar imaging by the European Space Agency revealed subsurface structures extending several kilometers beyond the known Giza complex. Among them were faint outlines of rectangular patterns parallel to the existing pyramid fields. These could be geological formations or the eroded remnants of older constructions now buried under thousands of years of drifted sand. To those who walk the plateau at dawn, when the light falls low across the stones, the geometry becomes visible again. The shadows of the pyramids stretch toward each other, intersecting along lines unseen from above. The air itself seems divided by invisible design, as if the sand remembers what the builders once measured. The blueprint of Giza is not drawn on papyrus or carved on stelae. It exists in ratios, alignments, and the unbroken accuracy of the stones. Whether conceived by Khufu's architects or inherited from an older world, the plan endures beneath the surface, silent, exact, and indifferent to time. The architects before the pharaohs, before Khufu, before dynasties, before even the word Egypt carried meaning, the Nile Valley was already a place of builders. Stone fragments, worn and half-buried, hint at an older craft, megalithic techniques that appear, then vanish, as if history itself forgot the names of those who used them. Across Saqqara, Abydos, and Abu Rawash, traces of this older architecture remain. Silent witnesses to a time before kings inscribed their names on walls. The earliest known Egyptian stonework predates Khufu by centuries. At Saqqara, the step pyramid of Giza, designed by Imhotep around 2650 BCE, is considered the first large-scale stone monument. Yet even there, one finds anomalies that resist explanation. Beneath Giza's pyramid stretches a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers cut through bedrock with precision, far beyond the copper tools attributed to the Third Dynasty. Some shafts descend more than 100 feet, their walls smooth as if melted or planed by mechanical means. The technique appears refined, not experimental, as though drawn from a deeper memory. At Abydos, 300 miles to the south, the Osirian temple rests hidden behind the later complex of Seti I. Discovered in 1902, it lies 50 feet below ground level, built of massive granite and sandstone blocks weighing up to 100 tons. Its architecture is cyclopean, simple, squared, and without ornament. Egyptologists assign it to Seti's reign in the 13th century BCE, but the building's water-weathered surfaces and unadorned style resemble none of his other constructions. British archaeologist Margaret Murray wrote that it seems to belong to an older civilization altogether. The same impression arises at Abu Rawash, the site of a ruined pyramid often credited to Djedefre, Khufu's son. The stones here are harder, the foundations larger, and the cuts straighter than those in Khufu's own monument. Yet the pyramid itself was left unfinished, as if the builders abandoned a project they did not fully understand. French archaeologist Jean-Pierre Adam noted that the tooling marks are inconsistent with Fourth Dynasty methods. The foundation trench, carved directly into limestone, bears deep circular scars, suggestive of rotary boring rather than hammering. These mechanical traces appear elsewhere. In the subterranean galleries of Serapeum at Saqqara, massive granite boxes lie in dark alcoves, each weighing around 70 tons. Their interiors are perfectly square, with inner surfaces polished to mirror quality. Modern machinists who measured them with laser levels found tolerances of less than 1/1000th of an inch. Officially, these boxes were sarcophagi for sacred bulls, yet no inscriptions name a single bull interred within them. Their craftsmanship exceeds any practical need of the period. To cut and shape granite with such accuracy, copper tools would have been inadequate. Granite registers 6 on the Mohs hardness scale, while copper ranks only 3. Some researchers, including engineer Christopher Dunn, have suggested that tubular drilling methods, or abrasive compounds, far more advanced than simple sand, must have been used. In one museum piece from Aswan, a granite core shows spiral tool marks consistent with high-speed rotation. Whatever made them, the technique seems to have vanished long before the New Kingdom began. At the site of Hierakonpolis, pre-dynastic settlements reveal pottery fired at temperatures exceeding 1,100 degrees Celsius, an industrial level of control unmatched until thousands of years later. Nearby, fragments of diorite bowls exhibit symmetry that implies lathe turning. Their surfaces are uniformly curved, their rims precisely leveled, as though crafted with mechanical aids. Yet the artifacts date to around 4000 BCE, centuries before the invention of the wheel in Egypt. If such skills existed, where did they go? The archaeological record suggests an interruption rather than a steady evolution. Between the building of the Osirion and the later Old Kingdom pyramids, techniques seem to regress from precision megalithic work to smaller, cruder masonry. This decline is difficult to explain within a single continuous civilization. Some Egyptologists attribute it to shifts in material availability or workforce organization. Others quietly note that the earliest structures look as if they were built by those already expert in stone, not by beginners learning through trial. Ancient Egyptian tradition preserved faint memories of these earlier architects. The Shabaka stone, a relic from the 25th dynasty, recounts a creation story in which Ptah, the divine craftsman, fashioned the world through thought and word. In the same text, the gods of Memphis are said to have inherited the plans of the primeval builders. Later priests may have interpreted these myths as allegory, but to modern eyes, they echo a recurring theme that the techniques of construction were received, not discovered. The Giza plateau itself may bear traces of their legacy. Geological surveys beneath the Great Pyramid show older strata cut and levelled long before Khufu's time. The bedrock terraces appear to have been prepared for something larger or different. Khufu's architects could have reused these ancient foundations, adapting their own design to a pre-existing plan. Even Herodotus, writing 2 millennia later, repeated Egyptian accounts that the pyramids stood on older ground, sacred to those who came before. At Elephantine Island, on Egypt's southern frontier, blocks bearing unknown tool marks lie beneath later temples. The granite surfaces show parallel striations unlike chisel lines, thin, evenly spaced, and continuous. These grooves, examined under magnification, suggest repetitive mechanical movement. No surviving Old Kingdom inscriptions describe such techniques. The origin of these marks remains unclassified in official reports. The fragments scattered across Egypt seem to belong to a vanished phase of craftsmanship, a lineage without record. Imhotep's genius, often celebrated as the dawn of Egyptian engineering, may in fact represent the last echo of a tradition already fading. The uniform precision of early megaliths, followed by the relative roughness of later works, reverses the normal pattern of human progress. It is as if mastery arrived first, then memory weakened. Modern dating methods, limited to organic material, cannot directly determine the age of stone monuments. Thus, the true builders of these early works remain unnamed. Their tools are gone, their workshops erased, their blueprints lost beneath millennia of sand. Only the evidence of their hands endures in the perfect plains of granite, the concentric drill grooves, and the quiet geometry that links sites separated by hundreds of miles. Whoever they were, their legacy shaped the landscape Khufu would later claim. The pyramids, the Sphinx, and the enduring alignment of Giza may all rest upon foundations conceived long before pharaohs carved their cartouches. The Nile has risen and receded countless times since, carrying away the soil of history, but the stones remain mute, precise, and older than the memory that surrounds them. The language of the stones. Long before hieroglyphs told stories of gods and kings, the builders of Egypt seemed to write in another language, one that required no words at all. It was a language of measure, angle, and proportion, spoken through limestone and granite, through circles that never quite closed and ratios that repeated across centuries. To the casual observer, the pyramids are monuments of stone. To those who study their geometry, they are sentences in a code that still resists translation. The Great Pyramid of Giza, often called Khufu's Pyramid, measures 230.4 meters along its base and rises to 146.6 meters. Divide the perimeter by twice its height, and the result approximates 3.1416, the value of pi. This ratio, discovered by 19th century surveyor John Taylor and later confirmed by Sir Flinders Petrie, was not likely an accident. The precision exceeds what coincidence would allow, hinting that the ancient architects understood the relationship between circle and square, heaven and earth. The pyramid's height can also be read as the radius of a sphere whose circumference equals the base perimeter, linking the structure to both geometry and planetary measure. Throughout Egypt, similar ratios recur with a quiet regularity. The internal angle of the Great Pyramid's slope, 51 degrees 51 minutes, creates a height-to-base ratio of 7:11, a proportion mirrored in smaller pyramids across the Nile Valley. When mapped as a cross-section, this angle also reproduces the geometry of a circle's radius and circumference, as if the builders were encoding the mathematical bridge between linear and circular forms. In Saqqara's step pyramid, designed by Imhotep centuries earlier, archaeologists found subterranean chambers organized according to harmonic spacing. The distances between shafts and walls correspond to ratios found in musical scales 2:3, 3:4, and 4:5. Modern acousticians who tested these chambers noted resonances that amplify certain tones, creating deep harmonic vibrations when sound is introduced. Whether intentional or incidental, the precision of these ratios suggests a deliberate exploration of sound and space. The same proportional order extends beyond pyramids. In Karnak and Luxor, temple columns are arranged in harmonic progressions, with spacing and height-forming ratios consistent with musical intervals. In the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, the hypostyle hall's dimensions mirror the mathematical relationship of a diatonic scale. Egyptologists attribute such precision to aesthetic balance. Yet the consistency across hundreds of miles implies a shared underlying system, a language of proportion that predated written notation. The sacred cubit, the fundamental unit of Egyptian measurement, offers another clue. Defined as approximately 52.36 centimeters, it reappears in monument after monument with almost metrological perfection. The number itself is not arbitrary. 52.36 centimeters multiplied by 10 million equals 1/4 of the Earth's circumference in meters. Whether this reflects conscious design or extraordinary coincidence remains unresolved. Yet the same cubit converts naturally into divisions of both the solar year and human anatomy, suggesting a measurement derived from observation of nature rather than decree. Ancient texts hint that the builders viewed numbers as living principles rather than abstractions. The Rind mathematical papyrus, copied around 1650 BCE, refers to geometry as secrets of the gods. Even mundane calculations of fields and bread rations were framed as acts of cosmic balance. To the Egyptians, measuring was not merely practical, it was a form of ritual alignment, a way to keep the order of the heavens reflected upon the earth. In the Great Pyramid's internal structure, scholars have found ratios linking the dimensions of the king's chamber to those of the pyramid itself. The chamber's length to width equals 2:1, while its height relates to these through square root 5, a proportion known later as the golden ratio's derivative. The result is not merely aesthetic balance, but mathematical coherence, as if the room were tuned to the same geometry that defines the pyramid's outer form. Mathematician Livio Stechini, studying Egyptian surveying methods in the 20th century, proposed that the builders used harmonic triangulation based on astronomical observation. The diagonal of the Great Pyramid's base, for instance, aligns almost perfectly with the meridian of Heliopolis, Egypt's ancient center of solar worship. Such alignments suggest that geometry and theology were intertwined, each reinforcing the other's truth. At Abu Simbel, built much later by Ramses II, sunlight penetrates the inner sanctuary only twice a year, on February 22 and October 22, dates believed to mark the pharaoh's coronation and birth. This mastery of solar geometry consistent with earlier architectural principles, demonstrates a lineage of knowledge preserved over millennia. The same silent mathematics that shaped Khufu's pyramid guided the hands of later generations, even when its meanings had faded into ritual. When viewed as a system, Egyptian architecture behaves like notation, a record of relationships rather than events. The repetition of precise ratios across time and distance implies a shared symbolic vocabulary, a continuity of number. To the builders, 2 to 3 or 5 to 8 were not just fractions but harmonies, echoes of cosmic order rendered in stone. In 1950, French architect Albert Champdor examined the Great Pyramid's inner geometry and concluded that its key ratios formed a mathematical scale capable of reproducing both the solar year and the proportions of the human body. The chamber dimensions corresponded to intervals of frequency when converted to sound, implying a link between physical space and vibration. Though speculative, such interpretations resonate with the Egyptian view of the universe as sound brought into form, the word of creation made visible. No hieroglyph ever explains these numbers. The papyri that survive discuss fractions, bread loaves, and taxes, but none describe why the pyramid's base encodes the planet or why its height mirrors celestial constants. Perhaps the knowledge was considered too sacred to record in ordinary writing, or perhaps it was never written at all, existing only through the act of building knowledge embodied rather than described. Over time, as techniques were lost and dynasties shifted, the language of the stones grew silent. Later temples imitated the form but not the underlying ratios. Later scribes recorded prayers but not equations. The builder's syntax, rooted in geometry, harmony, and proportion, faded until only the monuments themselves remained to speak. Today, their message endures in the stillness of stone angles and sunlit corridors. Each ratio, each line, each precisely measured shadow forms a word in a forgotten dialect of mathematics. To read it is to trace the same geometry that binds the stars above and the measure of the earth below, a quiet reminder that knowledge, once carved into stone, never truly disappears. The sound that shaped the stones. Among Egypt's oldest myths, one phrase repeats with quiet precision. Creation began with a sound. The god Ptah, patron of craftsmen and builders, was said to have spoken the world into existence through the vibration of his heart and the movement of his tongue. In this image, sound as form, vibration as matter, some researchers see more than theology. They see a forgotten principle of engineering, an ancient memory of sound shaping stone. For centuries, Egyptian construction was explained in the language of levers, ramps, and manpower. Tens of thousands of workers, pulling ropes and dragging sledges, are said to have raised the pyramids block by block. Yet scattered hints in temple carvings, papyri, and later writings suggest that sound held a role beyond ritual. Reliefs in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, for instance, show priests holding sistrum's crescent-shaped rattles before columns inscribed with resonant patterns. The hieroglyphs surrounding these images speak of tones that wake the stone and voices that lift the load. In 1939, Swedish engineer Henry Kjellson collected accounts from travellers who heard stories of monks in Tibet using sound to move boulders. According to these reports, long horns and drums were arranged in arcs around stones that slowly lifted or slid after rhythmic chanting. Though unverified, the account parallels Egyptian depictions where workers, musicians, and priests appear together in construction scenes, suggesting that rhythm and vibration were part of a coordinated process. Modern science has begun to revisit such possibilities, not as myth, but as acoustics. In 1970, Egyptian engineer Dr. Ibrahim Karim measured the resonant frequencies of several chambers inside the Great Pyramid. The King's Chamber, built entirely of granite, amplifies low-frequency vibrations between 30 and 40 Hz. These tones correspond to natural seismic waves frequencies capable of making solid material oscillate. Karim observed that even a human voice sustained at those pitches could trigger a faint resonance through the stone. In 1999, an acoustic survey, led by Tom Danley for the Egyptian Antiquities Organization, confirmed these findings. When pink noise was played inside the chamber, microphones recorded standing waves forming harmonic nodes along its length. The chamber acted as a resonator, magnifying specific tones rather than muting them. The sound did not simply echo, it sustained itself. Such behavior implies that the room's dimensions were tuned intentionally. Its geometry designed to reinforce natural frequencies of vibration. Ancient Egyptian texts often associate sound with life force. The hieroglyph for sound, Seshem, shares roots with words, meaning to command and to create. In the pyramid texts of Unas, dating to around 2300 BCE, the pharaoh's ascent to the stars is described through the words that open the stone. These words may have been more than poetry. They may have represented chants or frequencies used in ceremony or construction. In 1988, British researcher John Stuart Reid conducted experiments using cymatics, the visualization of sound vibrations on sand and liquid. When specific frequencies were projected into a model of the king's chamber, geometric patterns resembling pyramid cross-sections formed in the sand. Reid concluded that the chamber's shape acts as a sonic mold, capable of producing stable, standing wave geometries. To the ancient builders, such patterns might have symbolized the word made visible, the vibration that orders matter. Further north at Saqqara, the Serapeum's granite sarcophagi exhibit an acoustic phenomenon of their own. When tapped, the boxes emit deep tones that linger in the air for several seconds. Each has a slightly different pitch, as if tuned to a scale. Engineers measuring their frequencies found harmonic relationships between them, ratios similar to those used in musical tuning. Whether this was intentional or coincidental remains unknown, but the regularity suggests design. Some researchers propose that sound, in combination with water or air pressure, may have played a mechanical role in construction. Archaeologist Paul Devereaux has noted that certain chambers beneath temples contain cavities shaped like horns or flutes, architectural features that could amplify vibration. Ancient workers may have discovered that sustained rhythmic sound could loosen limestone or move sand supporting large blocks, reducing friction enough to shift them with minimal force. No definitive proof survives, but experimental archaeology supports the idea. Low-frequency resonance can indeed cause granular materials to behave like fluid. In Egyptian cosmology, vibration was not separate from creation, it was creation. The Memphite theology, inscribed on the Shabaka stone, declares that Ptah conceived in his heart and commanded by his tongue all that exists. The universe, in this sense, was spoken into alignment, each sound a frequency that defined the form of life and stone alike. Builders, inheriting this worldview, may have applied its principles physically, using sound not only to sanctify, but to build. Even in modern times, echoes of this ancient knowledge persist. The Great Pyramid continues to hum faintly during earthquakes, its internal passages channeling vibrations through the bedrock. Engineers monitoring the structure have recorded oscillations matching its resonant frequencies, as if the pyramid were a massive tuning fork responding to the earth itself. To the Egyptians, This harmony between structure and sound was not coincidence. Temples were described as places where heaven sings to earth. The correct proportions produced resonance, and resonance was life. In such a worldview, to build was to tune to shape stone until it vibrated in sympathy with the cosmos. When travelers stand within the king's chamber today, the effect remains palpable. A single voice, even a whisper, carries unnaturally long, filling the air as though the stone were answering. The geometry amplifies the sound, sending it through the granite walls and downward into the bedrock, a vibration that continues after the speaker has fallen silent. If the ancients believed that sound could shape or move matter, their monuments are its surviving score architecture as music made solid. The desert holds no instruments now, only the echo of what might have once been played. The stones remember their own tone, and in their quiet resonance, the past still hums. The engineers of the afterlife. Beneath the sands of Egypt, silence takes the shape of corridors, shafts, and chambers whose precision has survived for thousands of years. To most, these were tombs, architectural metaphors for eternity. But to the builders, they were also machines. Not machines of metal and gear, but of stone and air, water and light, each one designed to sustain a delicate balance between the living world and what lay beyond. The Egyptians saw death not as an end, but as a transformation. The tomb, accordingly, was not a container, but a vessel engineered for passage. Every angle, every vent, every shaft had purpose. When the first explorers entered the Great Pyramid, they found the so-called air shafts rising from the king's and queen's chambers at precise inclinations, 32 and 39 degrees, piercing straight through the stone to the pyramid's surface. For centuries, these were assumed to be primitive ventilation ducts. Yet later analysis revealed their paths align with specific stars, Al-Nitak in Orion's belt to the south, and Thuban in Draco to the north. The shafts, then, were not for breathing but for orientation, guiding the king's spirit toward the constellations of his rebirth. Still, their construction betrays technical understanding far ahead of their time. Each shaft is less than 20 centimeters wide, yet extends more than 60 meters through solid limestone, maintaining perfect angular precision. Engineers replicating the cuts today with modern tools find the alignment error within a few arc minutes impossible without advanced surveying. The builders were astronomers as much as masons, translating celestial geometry into architecture. Other monuments reveal the same dual design. At Saqqara, the step pyramid substructure descends into a labyrinth of tunnels that connect 400 rooms. Their layout allows air to circulate through pressure differences created by temperature changes between inner and outer passages. The effect keeps the chambers at stable humidity, preventing decay of wooden coffins and offerings. What appears as symbolism also functions as early environmental control, a system born of observation, not theory. Water, too, played a quiet role. Beneath several pyramids, narrow shafts end abruptly in pools or sealed cavities. At Hawara, near the Fayum oasis, 19th century explorers reported water seeping into lower chambers even in dry seasons. Engineers later determined that these shafts intersect natural aquifers, suggesting that the builders understood hydrostatic pressure. Some theorists proposed that these water systems were intentional, allowing the monuments to stabilize their own foundations against shifting soil. Others speculate that the builders observed the resonance created when water levels rose and fell within sealed stone cavities, a phenomenon that could have held symbolic meaning as the breath of the tomb. In 2010, Egyptian engineer Dr. Mustafa Gad re-examined the tunnel systems beneath Djoser's complex. Using airflow sensors, he discovered measurable pressure oscillations between inner and outer shafts, forming a natural ventilation rhythm as temperatures changed through the day. The structure, he wrote, functions as a living lung. Though intended as sacred architecture, it operates with the precision of an engineered system. The temples along the Nile share the same synthesis of spirituality and mechanics. The Temple of Edfu, dedicated to Horus, includes underground channels that funnel Nile water through a network of pipes and basins. These features once drove ritual fountains but also controlled erosion around the foundation. At Luxor, the long processional avenue aligns perfectly with the rising of Sirius the star, whose reappearance heralded the annual flood. The temple thus doubled as both astronomical instrument and agricultural calendar, linking celestial timekeeping to the river's life cycle. Tombs in the Valley of the Kings demonstrate similar awareness of geology and physics. Builders chose strata resistant to collapse, carving entrances that sloped downward at precisely calculated angles to drain rainwater. In the tomb of Tutankhamun, narrow grooves cut along the ceiling, edges were found to divert condensation away from the paintings. Centuries of unseen engineers perfected these details, their names lost beneath the fame of the kings they served. In Egyptian belief, the body's preservation was essential for rebirth, but the mechanism of that rebirth, the transition of the soul, was thought to depend on harmony between structure and cosmos. The tomb was built to mirror the sky. The corridors mimicked the sun's journey through the underworld. The burial chamber represented the night in which the soul travelled before dawn. The precision of alignment ensured that what occurred in heaven could occur again in stone. Even smaller artifacts carry traces of engineering intent. Canopic chests were fitted with sealing plugs, shaped to create vacuum-like closures once resin-cooled, preventing decay without metal fasteners. Sarcophagi lids were beveled to exact degrees, distributing weight evenly across multiple contact points, reducing the risk of fracture. These were not accidents of craftsmanship, but deliberate designs. One of the most curious examples lies not in a pyramid, but at Abydos. In 1914, archaeologists discovered a long, straight trench known as the Shunet el-Zabib, dating to the Second Dynasty. Beneath its walls ran conduits carved into the bedrock, each precisely graded to channel water away from the structure during floods. The design anticipates Roman drainage systems by nearly 2,000 years. When tested after excavation, the channels still carried water exactly as intended. To modern eyes, the idea of engineering for eternity seems poetic. To the ancient Egyptians, it was literal. Their architects sought permanence, not only through scale, but through function, by ensuring that the tomb would breathe, drain, and align long after its builders were gone. Their immortality was mechanical as well as spiritual. Even the Great Pyramid's hidden chambers reflect this dual purpose. Modern thermographic scans show temperature differentials that fluctuate with the sun's angle, hinting at internal convection flows. The structure behaves like a heat engine, absorbing and releasing energy through daily cycles. Whether intentional or incidental, the result is the same: a monument that responds to its environment as if alive. The builders of Egypt's afterlife were more than servants of faith. They were engineers of balance. They measured the stars to orient passageways, studied the Nile to place foundations, and shaped air and water to sustain what they built. Every stone was both prayer and calculation. Every corridor both metaphor and mechanism. Today, when archaeologists descend into those chambers, the air still moves slow, cool, and measured. It is the same breath that has circulated since the time of Khufu, unseen yet continuous. The machines of eternity still function, quietly fulfilling their purpose beneath the desert. The tombs that spoke of stars. When the first archaeologists entered the tombs of Egypt's New Kingdom, they expected walls filled with prayers and offerings. What they found instead were skies. Across ceilings and corridors, the Egyptians had painted constellations, planetary paths, and arcs of stars so exact that astronomers can still recognize them today. The tombs were not only gateways to the afterlife, they were maps of the heavens, designed to guide the departed through the same stars that once guided the builders. The relationship between death and the sky runs deep in Egyptian thought. The earliest pyramid texts, carved into the walls of the 5th and 6th dynasty tombs at Saqqara around 2400 BCE, describe the king's ascent through the heavens in careful steps. The king is a star unfailing, who crosses the sky with Orion. The words suggest astronomy used not for navigation, but for resurrection. The stars were not distant points of light, they were destinations, each representing a stage of transformation. In these texts, the circumpolar stars, those that never set below the horizon, were called the imperishables. To the Egyptians, they embodied eternity, for they circled endlessly around the northern sky. The pharaoh's spirit was believed to join them, becoming part of their endless motion. This idea explains why pyramid shafts and burial chambers so often aligned toward the north. They were oriented toward immortality itself. The ceilings of tombs continued this cosmic conversation. In the tomb of Senenmut, architect to Queen Hatshepsut around 1470 BCE, the ceiling bears the oldest known star map in Egypt. It shows constellations, lunar cycles, and decans, 36 stellar groups, marking divisions of the night. Each decan represented about 10 degrees of the sky, allowing priests to measure time by observing which stars rose just before dawn. This system, older than the solar calendar, was both scientific and spiritual. The measurement of eternity by its visible signs. Later, tombs elaborated this stellar cartography. The burial chambers of Seti I and Ramesses VI in the Valley of the Kings display vast astronomical ceilings, fields of dark blue scattered with golden stars, crossed by figures of deities steering solar boats through night. Between them run bands of hieroglyphs, recording planetary cycles and hours of darkness. In Seti's tomb, astronomers have identified precise depictions of Orion, Canis Major, and the Milky Way, aligned with the layout of the chamber itself. The architecture mirrors the sky, so that the pharaoh, in death, would dwell within a scaled model of the cosmos. This merging of art and astronomy was not symbolic decoration. It followed rules of observation, refined over centuries. At Dendera, in the Temple of Hathor, a circular relief now known as the Dendera zodiac shows constellations arranged with remarkable accuracy. It includes the familiar patterns of Leo, Taurus, and Aquarius, but also records planetary positions that correspond to the spring equinox of 50 BCE. The relief was carved late in Egypt's history, yet it preserves a system of sky mapping that began millennia earlier. The connection between stellar observation and architecture reaches even deeper. The axis of the Great Pyramid, aligned almost perfectly to true north, could only have been achieved through direct sighting of circumpolar stars. In the Old Kingdom, Thuban in the constellation Draco served as the pole star. By aligning construction lines to its nightly rotation, builders achieved accuracies that modern surveyors still measure with admiration. The same principle governed the placement of temples along the Nile. Many are oriented to heliacal risings of key stars, moments when a star first becomes visible at dawn after days of invisibility. These risings marked agricultural and religious calendars alike. Within tombs, the stars also had names and duties. The decans governed the hours of night. The planets, called the ones who know their places, traced visible order through chaos. The Book of the Night, painted in the tomb of Ramesses IX, divides the heavens into 12 caverns through which the sun god Ra travels each hour before dawn. Every chamber of the tomb corresponds to one of these celestial regions. The pharaoh's passage through them mirrored the sun's rebirth, a cycle repeated daily and eternally. In 1901, British astronomer Norman Lockyer compared the orientations of several Egyptian temples to known star positions. He concluded that many had been realigned over time, tracking the slow precession of the equinoxes. Temples that once faced Sirius or Orion gradually drifted from alignment, prompting later builders to adjust axes or rebuild sanctuaries altogether. The Egyptians, therefore, not only observed precession, they compensated for it through architecture, preserving harmony between heaven and stone. Inscriptions from the Temple of Edfu describe the laying of a foundation as an astronomical event. Priests would mark the cardinal points by sighting the stars with a tool called the merket and a sighting rod. The ceremony, known as stretching the cord, united priest, pharaoh, and cosmos. To build wrongly was to disrupt order. To align correctly was to restore Ma'at, the balance of the universe. This careful celestial geometry extended into the smallest details of burial design. The sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, shaped as a golden boat, was positioned to face west, the direction of the setting sun, and entrance to the underworld. Above it, on the tomb's ceiling, the goddess Nut stretches across the sky, her body filled with stars. She swallows the sun at dusk and gives birth to it at dawn, her form embodying both horizon and resurrection. For the dead king, lying beneath her, the stars were not ornaments, but coordinates for his journey through eternity. Even today, the tombs preserve that quiet precision. The constellations painted in mineral blue still glow under lamplight, marking paths no longer walked. To archaeologists, they record one of the earliest attempts to chart the cosmos. To the builders, they were the road itself, the sky folded into stone, a map that never fades. Each star, each figure, each line of hieroglyphic measure carries the same message written across all Egyptian monuments, that life and the heavens were mirrors, and that through geometry and alignment the mortal could join the eternal. The tombs spoke this truth softly through pigment and calculation, guiding those who entered not just underground, but upward toward the same stars that watched the builders carve their names into time. The gods who came from stone. Across the temples and quarries of Egypt, one idea echoes through inscriptions and ritual texts, that the gods did not simply dwell in stone, but emerged from it. This belief, quietly preserved in hieroglyphic hymns and temple reliefs, reveals a deeper understanding of the monuments themselves. Each statue, pillar, and sanctuary was not merely a representation of divinity, but a vessel through which divine energy could speak. The builders of Egypt shaped their gods into existence, fusing matter, sound, and geometry into living symbols of order. The oldest references come from the pyramid texts, inscribed more than 4,000 years ago. In one passage, the creator god Ptah fashioned the gods in their forms, causing them to come forth from every stone. Here, stone is not inert, it is primordial material, holding within it the potential of consciousness. To carve a god's image was to awaken the dormant essence already present within the rock. Later writings call this process Sart, the making alive, in which a statue or wall was ritually opened to perception through an act known as the opening of the mouth ceremony. During this ritual, priests touched the lips of statues or temple doors with small adzes and chisels made of meteoric iron, declaring, "Your mouth is opened by Horus, with the tool of iron, that you may speak. The iron believed to come from the stars served as the medium between heaven and earth. Once touched, the statue was said to breathe. This act transformed craftsmanship into theology. The god entered the stone not through faith, but through measured action and vibration. At temples such as Karnak and Luxor, the architecture itself appears designed to echo this idea. Each sanctuary was a sequence of transformations. Visitors entered through wide courts filled with sunlight and sound, then progressed through darker halls where columns closed in like forest trunks. By the time they reached the innermost chamber, the air was still, the light reduced to a single narrow beam striking an altar or statue. The experience replicated creation itself, the emergence of form from darkness. The stones, shaped and oriented to the rising sun, performed the myth each dawn. Inscriptions at Edfu described the gods as those who rise in stone, who hear the tones of the world. Priests there believed that sound vibrations awakened sacred structures, allowing divine presence to inhabit them. Modern acoustic studies support this ancient intuition. When researchers tested resonance frequencies in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, they discovered that its central sanctuary amplifies low-frequency sounds between 100 and 120 Hz, the same range as the human male voice. Chanting within those chambers produces standing waves that linger audibly, turning words into sustained tone. In the Temple of Amun at Karnak, another effect emerges. The great hyperstyle hall, 134 columns, each 10 meters tall, creates an acoustic pattern in which sound seems to move independently of its source. A single drum beat can be heard shifting from one row of columns to another, as though the building itself responds. To ancient listeners, this was not architecture, but conversation. The temple answered their prayer through its own echo, the god speaking from stone. The concept extends even into the statues themselves. The colossal figures of Amenhotep III, known as the Colossi of Memnon, once emitted tones at sunrise after being cracked by an earthquake in 27 BCE. Ancient travellers, including the Greek historian Strabo, reported hearing the sound of faint hum or whistle when sunlight struck the stone. Locals interpreted it as the god greeting the dawn. Modern researchers believe that moisture and heat caused the stone's crystalline structure to resonate, producing an audible vibration. For the ancients, this was proof of presence. The monument was alive. Within Egyptian theology, the boundary between divine and material never fully existed. The god was not contained inside the stone. The stone was the god in a moment of form. This belief is expressed in a recurring epithet found on stelae and temple walls, Netjer Mepeta, the god in the opening. The opening referred not only to doors and mouths, but to the fissures of light and sound that allowed communication between worlds. When the sun's first rays entered a temple, the beam did not merely illuminate the god, it became him. At Philae, dedicated to Isis, inscriptions record a ritual called the Awakening of the Sanctuary. Each morning, priests struck specific points on walls and pillars with small bronze instruments, producing harmonic tones. The sequence followed a pattern later associated with planetary order, an echo of the belief that the cosmos vibrated through rhythm. To touch the temple correctly was to re-establish the harmony between heaven and earth. Egypt's builders seemed to understand that geometry, sound, and light were not separate arts, but aspects of one principle. A temple aligned to the solstice, a statue carved to resonate at human frequencies, a wall inscribed with star maps, all were part of the same design. Matter tuned to meaning. Through these structures, the gods were not imagined, they were measured. In later centuries, Greek philosophers visiting Egypt interpreted this practice through their own vocabulary. Pythagoras, studying in Heliopolis around the 6th century BCE, described temples as instruments of harmony. Plato, writing later, echoed this idea when he called geometry the visible form of the divine. Both ideas trace their lineage to these early builders who saw proportion and vibration as the twin signatures of creation. Today, when light passes through the hypostyle halls or wind moves faintly between the pylons, the same principles endure. The monuments still respond to the elements as they were designed to. Each sunrise, the temples awaken, the statues grow warm, and the stone once again hums with the frequencies of the earth. The Egyptians built their gods not as distant abstractions but as forces that could inhabit their world. Through stone they gave shape to sound, through geometry they fixed eternity in place. The gods, in this sense, never departed. They remain wherever the stone still holds its tone, waiting for the next voice to awaken them. The builders who remembered the flood. In the oldest Egyptian records, scattered among hymns and temple inscriptions, lies a faint memory of catastrophe, a flood that erased the world before history began. Though less vivid than the Mesopotamian or biblical versions, Egypt's account lingers quietly, preserved in its symbols, myths, and architecture. The builders who raised the first pyramids may have worked in the shadow of that remembered deluge, shaping stone not only to honor gods, but to outlast the water that once covered the land. The story begins with Zep Tepi, the first time. Egyptian priests of the late period described it as an era when the gods ruled upon earth before the rise of kings. In this mythic past, the land was newly formed from the waters of Nun, the infinite ocean of chaos. Creation, in their view, began not with fire or thunder, but with a slow withdrawal of water. The primeval mound that emerged from Nun became sacred ground, the first dry land. Every temple in Egypt was designed as its symbolic replica, a raised platform above chaos, echoing that first emergence from the flood. Archaeological evidence aligns with the echoes of this story. Around 10,000 BCE, the Sahara was not desert but savanna, its lakes swollen from monsoon rains. Then, between 7,000 and 5,000 BCE, a major climate shift dried the region, driving people toward the Nile. Sediment cores taken near Aswan reveal layers of flood deposits thousands of years older than the pyramids. These layers contain fine silt and freshwater shells, evidence of a cataclysmic overflow far beyond the annual inundation. To those who witnessed it, the world would have seemed to vanish beneath the river's surface. Egyptian temple texts preserve hints of this transformation in religious language. At Hermopolis, priests worshipped 8 primordial deities called the Ogdoad, 4 male-female pairs representing darkness, hiddenness, infinity, and the primeval waters. Their union produced the hill that rose from chaos. In the cosmology of Heliopolis, Atum, the self-created god, stood upon this first mound and began creation. The Nile's annual flood became a divine rehearsal of that ancient emergence, reminding Egyptians that stability could be restored only through order rebuilt from water. The connection between flood and architecture was not metaphorical. Many temple foundations incorporate drainage tunnels, raised floors, and channels leading from courtyards to outer basins. These were practical features, but they also embodied memory. The sacred precinct of Karnak, for example, stands on a slightly elevated platform surrounded by a low enclosure wall, designed to contain floodwaters, like the boundary between chaos and land. When the Nile rose each year, priests described the temple as reborn. Inscriptions record offerings made to Hapi, the river god, thanking him for repeating the act of creation. At Abydos, Archaeologists uncovered flood deposits beneath early temple layers, dating to 5000 BCE, centuries before the unification of Egypt. The earliest builders leveled their structures atop silt that still bore ripple marks from standing water. Later dynasties continued to rebuild on the same site, layer upon layer, as if to maintain connection with the first dry mound. Even the shape of the pyramid may echo this memory. A geometric hill rising from water, the eternal Benben stone that first broke the flood surface. Other traces survive in parallel myths beyond Egypt's borders. The Sumerian Eridu Genesis, composed around 1600 BCE, tells of gods who sent a flood to destroy mankind, sparing only a single survivor, Ziusudra. The Hebrew account of Noah and the Quranic version of Nuh follow the same pattern. In all three regions, the Mesopotamian plains, the Levant, and the Nile Valley tradition places a vast flood at the dawn of civilization. Geological studies suggest that around 6000 BCE, melting ice from the north caused sea levels to rise dramatically, flooding the eastern Mediterranean basin and reshaping the delta landscapes. What was myth to the ancients may have been memory to their ancestors. Egyptian priests of the New Kingdom described earlier ages lost to waters that overran the earth. The Book of the Heavenly Cow, found in the tomb of Seti I, speaks of the time when humanity rebelled against Ra, and he sent the goddess Sekhmet to cleanse the world with blood and water. Afterward, Ra withdrew to the sky, leaving earth to mortal kings. Though symbolic, the story retains the sequence found in flood myths: worldwide destruction by water, survival of a remnant, and the establishment of a new order. Even in art, the memory of inundation persists. Bas-reliefs in the Temple of Edfu depict the Nun waters carved as parallel horizontal lines, supporting floating lotus flowers, the symbols of rebirth. Between them rises the island of creation, crowned by the sun disk. To the Egyptians, the flood was not punishment, but reset, the necessary prelude to renewal. Every year, when the Nile rose and spread across the fields, they saw it as a miniature echo of that cosmic flood, proof that creation was ongoing. In the late 20th century, core samples from the Fayum Depression and the Nile Delta provided geological support for this cyclical view. Beneath layers of agricultural soil, scientists found alternating strata of sand and silt, indicating repeated episodes of heavy flooding and drought between 6000 and 4000 BCE. These oscillations would have displaced populations and erased settlements, an experience easily mythologized as the destruction of the old world. If Egypt's early builders inherited such memories, their architecture can be read as a form of response. They built upward, away from the floodplain, choosing limestone plateaus for their tombs and temples. The Giza plateau itself sits on high bedrock, immune to Nile overflow. Each monument, from mastaba to pyramid, can be seen as a symbolic ark, a vessel of stone meant to preserve life, memory, and identity against water and time. The priests of Heliopolis called their sacred precinct Iunu, the pillar. They believed it stood upon the original mound that first emerged from none. In later ages, when floods came, the city became an island surrounded by shallow water, literally embodying its myth. Herodotus, visiting in the 5th century BCE, noted that the temples stand upon a height above the plain, which the river cannot reach. The architecture thus fulfilled its own legend, the land that survived the flood because it remembered it. To modern archaeologists, the flood is history. To the Egyptians, it was origin. They built not to prevent it, but to mirror its rhythm, to turn destruction into pattern, chaos into cycle. In their geometry of mounds and terraces, in their carvings of lotus rising from water, one can still sense the echo of an older world, the builders who remembered the flood and who answered it with stone, the legacy beneath the light. At sunrise, the Great Pyramid still casts the same shadow it has for more than 4,000 years. The sands shift around it, the city encroaches, but the lines remain. It stands as geometry translated into eternity, the last breath of an age when architecture, astronomy, and theology were one language. And yet, beneath its precision lies a question that no measurement has resolved: whether the builders of Egypt created their monuments to honor the gods or to preserve something far older than themselves. Across the Giza plateau, the air moves differently at dawn. The stone absorbs light slowly, as if waking. The Sphinx faces east, its eroded face the first to receive the sun. Behind it, the pyramids align with the horizon in a way so deliberate, so measured, that the moment of sunrise seems rehearsed. When the shadow of Khufu's pyramid touches the base of Khafre's, the angle matches the inclination of the Earth itself, 23.5 degrees. The same measure that defines the planet's axial tilt is written in stone, visible only for a few seconds each day. To stand there in silence is to witness something that feels less like construction and more like continuation. Each stone, each angle, each alignment appears to be part of a sequence, one that began long before the dynasties. Egypt's oldest myths spoke of a time when the gods taught humans the arts of building, of writing, of number. In these myths, the purpose of architecture was not to dominate nature, but to remember it, to fix its patterns in a form that could endure. The temples and pyramids, viewed this way, are not declarations of power, but instruments of memory. Underneath the plateau, surveys reveal what the surface refuses to tell: layers of construction upon earlier foundations. The limestone bedrock bears tool marks that predate the known reigns of Egypt's first kings. Beneath the Sphinx enclosure, cavities cut in, forgotten epochs wait, sealed and silent. No record describes them, no text names their builders. They are the hidden archive of a civilization that never wrote its own name. Egyptian priests of the late period spoke often of inheritance. "We found the temples already built," wrote Manetho, the historian of the 3rd century BCE, "and we renewed them." The phrase suggests a continuity not of time, but of purpose, each generation preserving what the last could not fully understand. Even Khufu, remembered as the builder of the Great Pyramid, may have been only its restorer, adding his name to a monument already ancient. The further archaeology looks into Egypt's past, the more refined its beginnings appear. Inside the Great Pyramid, the silence itself feels designed. The corridors narrow, the ceilings rise, and then suddenly the granite chamber opens around you like the interior of a tuning fork. Speak, and the sound folds back upon itself, sustaining longer than it should. Engineers have measured the frequencies that resonate within that space: 438 Hz, 610 Hz, and 710 Hz, harmonics that fall near the natural resonance of the human chest voice. The geometry transforms breath into standing wave, turning the visitor into part of the structure. To enter is to be measured, to be heard by the stone. For the ancients, sound was not decoration, it was force. The temple was a place where vibration became visible, where chant and architecture joined to recreate the first act of creation. When Ptah spoke the world from silence, the Great Pyramid may embody that same idea on a scale beyond ritual. Each angle, each chamber, each air shaft could be the frozen form of resonance itself, a monument built to hold the tone of the earth. Over time, Egypt changed. but its geometry did not. Later temples echoed earlier ones, repeating their alignments even as belief shifted from gods to kings to ideas. The builders of Luxor and Edfu worked from inherited measurements, not merely aesthetic preference. They aligned walls with solstices and star risings that had lost their original significance. Yet by preserving the form, they preserved the data, the blueprint of the world as once understood. The Greek scholars who came later recognized fragments of this knowledge. Pythagoras studied in Heliopolis and returned home speaking of harmony, proportion, and the music of the spheres. Plato described geometry as the instrument of the divine. These were not Greek inventions, but echoes of an older science, one the Egyptians encoded not in scrolls, but in architecture. When later civilizations built cathedrals, observatories, and labyrinths, they repeated Egypt's principle, that form itself could be language, that measure could be memory. Even now, in the age of satellites and lasers, the Great Pyramid remains the most precisely aligned building on Earth. Its 4 sides face true north, south, east, and west more accurately than any modern monument. Its base curvature mirrors the Earth's, its proportions encode pi and the golden ratio, and its height, multiplied by 43,200, equals the planet's polar radius, whether intentional or not. These harmonies bind the pyramid to the Earth that bears it. Archaeologists, engineers, and mathematicians continue to measure it, to model it, to scan it in search of purpose. Yet the answer may not lie in hidden chambers or lost technologies, but in the stillness itself. The builders understood that permanence is not achieved through secrecy, but through balance between stone and sky, number and meaning, silence and vibration. What they created was less a monument and more a frequency, a structure that hums in sympathy with the planet and the stars. If Egypt's monuments survive, while others crumble, it may be because they were built not against time, but with it. Their design obeys the same cycles that govern the heavens. Their alignments mirror the drift of stars. Their stones expand and contract with the rhythm of temperature and breath. They are, in every sense, alive within their stillness. The sands of the plateau will continue to rise and fall. The city will press closer. The river will change its course. Yet the geometry endures. The Great Pyramid will still meet the sun each morning, its shadow tracing the same path it has for millennia. It will still hold the same silence, the same tone, the same question, one that no inscription answers and no theory silences. Whoever the builders were, whatever they remembered or preserved, they left behind not a message, but a design. And through that design, the memory of their world remains measured in light, written in shadow, alive in the vibration of stone. The stones of Egypt have outlasted every empire, every theory, every name carved into their surface. They remain unchanged, indifferent, and exact. Perhaps their builders never meant for us to find an answer. Perhaps they meant only for us to look, to measure, to remember that knowledge itself can be a monument. When the last light fades across the plateau, the Great Pyramid still aligns with the same stars it did when the world was young. It still hums in the same frequency, still mirrors the same sky. What it protects may not be treasure or secret, only the memory of how precise existence can be. If the past still speaks through stone, then every measurement is a translation, and the search continues. Join us again as we follow the next trace left in the sand, another mystery carved in silence, waiting beneath the light. Subscribe for more forgotten histories and hidden designs of our ancient world.